U.S. President Donald Trump said the United States had carried out a large-scale operation targeting Venezuela, resulting in the detention of President Nicolás Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores, who were then removed from the country. In his statement, Trump said the operation was conducted in coordination with U.S. law enforcement agencies. He did not provide further details, adding that more information would be released later. Trump also announced that a press conference was scheduled for 11 a.m. local time at Mar-a-Lago. At 2 a.m. in Caracas, while the city was still asleep, thunderous explosions and flashes of gunfire marked an unprecedented turning point in Latin American history. This was no longer a war of warnings or sanctions on paper. The United States had moved to direct military action, and the target was not just military installations, but the person of President Nicolás Maduro himself. In the early hours of May 0, 2026, the world was left stunned. A lightning-fast operation, a daring raid by Delta Force, and a shock announcement from Donald Trump confirmed what had seemed unthinkable. Nicolás Maduro had been captured. From missile-based diversionary strikes to the intricate legal and political calculations operating behind the scenes, every element converged on a single objective. Caracas was rocked by a series of coordinated attacks lasting roughly 30 minutes, enough to overwhelm defenses, but brief enough to control the narrative. According to reports from Associated Press and other verified sources, U.S. forces launched long-range missiles and deployed armed helicopters against targets in 3 strategic regions: Aragua, Miranda, and La Guaira. Military analysts quickly concluded these strikes were a carefully executed feint. While Venezuela's air defenses focused on the barrage, elite Delta units, the most highly trained special operations force in the U.S. military, quietly inserted into Caracas, moving undetected as the decisive phase of the operation unfolded. Their objective was not to destroy infrastructure, but to carry out a surgical capture targeting President Nicolás Maduro and his wife. Just minutes after Venezuela's Defense Minister Vladimir Pedrino Lopez called on the armed forces to resist, Donald Trump posted an announcement on Truth Social, declaring the operation a success and confirming that Maduro and his spouse had been detained and removed from Venezuelan territory. The move raised an immediate and explosive question. Why would the United States risk a direct strike on the capital of a sovereign nation without congressional authorization or a formal declaration of war? According to U.S. officials, the answer lies in how Washington framed the mission. Rather than labeling it a military invasion, the operation was publicly described as a law enforcement action. Senior figures, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio, argued that the mission fell under the protection and execution of U.S. law enforcement authority, an interpretation designed to sidestep the legal and political thresholds of conventional warfare. They relied on outstanding international arrest warrants against Nicolás Maduro, accusing him of collusion with notorious transnational criminal groups, including Trendo Aragua and the Sinaloa cartel. Washington's earlier decision to place a $50 million bounty on Maduro effectively recast him, in U.S. legal terms, as an international criminal suspect. Framed this way, the White House described the pre-dawn operation as a transnational law enforcement action, exploiting a narrow constitutional pathway to employ force without a formal declaration of war. Venezuela's internal situation has since spiraled into unprecedented chaos. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez acknowledged that the government does not know Maduro's whereabouts and demanded that the United States provide proof of his safety. Under the Constitution, executive authority should temporarily pass to the vice president. But the reality on the ground is far more complex. Washington does not recognize the Maduro government, while the opposition insists that Edmundo Gonzalez is the country's legitimate leader. This power vacuum, combined with a nationwide mobilization order issued by the outgoing authorities, has pushed Venezuela toward the brink of civil conflict and escalating violence. In the immediate aftermath of the strike, Caracas's closest allies, Russia, Iran, and Cuba, issued sharply worded condemnations, branding the U.S. action a blatant military invasion. Colombian President Gustavo Petro called for an emergency meeting of the United Nations to avert a regional humanitarian disaster. Russia's foreign ministry denounced what it described as an armed aggression carried out by the United States against Venezuela, asserting that no justification for such actions is acceptable. The ministry further emphasized that Latin America must remain a zone of peace, urging all parties to prevent further escalation and to seek a resolution through dialogue. Venezuela, it said, must be guaranteed the right to determine its own future, free from any external intervention deemed destructive. Beyond even the question of military intervention, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia said its embassy in Caracas remains fully operational and that there are, so far, no reports of Russian citizens being harmed. In reality, the United States had been preparing for this moment since September 2025, quietly ramping up its military presence in waters off Venezuela's coast. President Donald Trump's resolve signals that Washington is prepared to accept the risk of direct confrontation with other major powers in order to reshape the balance of power in Latin America. As smoke rose from targeted military facilities, the central question became unavoidable. Why now? Why did the United States choose this moment to strike? And what was the real motive behind such a bold operation? Why would Washington take such an extraordinary political risk by attacking the capital of a sovereign state without congressional authorization? According to U.S. officials, the answer rests on three core pillars of Trump's strategy. First, the White House has refused to label the action an invasion. Instead, it has framed the raid as a large-scale law enforcement operation. Senior figures, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio, argued that U.S. forces were executing an international arrest warrant against a fugitive suspect. In Washington's view, Nicolás Maduro is accused of colluding with transnational criminal organizations such as Tren de Aragua and the Sinaloa cartel. Under this legal logic, the Caracas government is no longer treated as a legitimate political authority, but as a foreign criminal enterprise, one the White House claims is poisoning the United States with narcotics and fueling a mass migration crisis. This framing allows Trump to argue that the operation is constitutional, effectively transforming the U.S. military into an extension of international law enforcement. The second pillar is more overtly pragmatic. Observers point to Trump's statements in late December 2025 when he openly accused Venezuela of seizing American oil assets, a grievance that has since become central to the administration's justification for decisive action. The United States has never forgotten Venezuela's decision to nationalize major American oil companies under the late President Hugo Chavez, a policy later upheld by Nicolás Maduro. For Donald Trump, dismantling the Maduro government is seen as the fastest route to restoring U.S. access to what are believed to be the world's largest proven oil reserves, while simultaneously eliminating the energy footprint of rivals such as Russia and China. Venezuela has long functioned as a strategic outpost for Russia, Iran, and Cuba in the Western Hemisphere. The U.S. military buildup, including the deployment of the aircraft carrier USS Gerald R. Ford off Venezuela's coast since September 2025, was not solely aimed at intercepting drug trafficking. It was widely interpreted as a message sent directly to Moscow and Tehran. This is Washington's backyard, and it intends to restore order on its own terms. Venezuela's Vice President Delcy Rodriguez said the government does not know the whereabouts of President Maduro or First Lady Cilia Flores. Rodriguez demanded that the Trump administration immediately provide proof of life for both Maduro and Flores. She added that the U.S. strike had resulted in casualties among Venezuelan officials, military personnel, and civilians. Caracas has formally requested an emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council to address what it described as U.S. actions against Venezuela. A Republican senator who spoke directly with Secretary of State Marco Rubio revealed that the United States detained Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro with the intention of bringing him to trial in the United States. Senator Mike Lee of Utah posted early that morning that Rubio had informed him Maduro had been taken into U.S. custody to face criminal charges, and that the military action carried out overnight was designed to protect the officers executing the arrest warrant. Legal analysts say the move may fall within presidential authority under Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution, which allows the president to act to protect U.S. forces from imminent threat. On the ground, experts used the word astonishing to describe the speed of the operation. In less than an hour, an entire national air defense and command structure was neutralized, clearing the way for a raid aimed at the regime's top leadership. Clear indicators of special operations involvement were visible in the tightly synchronized coordination of dozens of helicopters and a large air package that included both fixed-wing aircraft and specialized platforms. Analysts noted that while strikes were spread across multiple regions, the true operational objective was narrowly confined and highly specific. This, they argue, confirms the action was not a campaign of widespread destruction, but a deliberate military surgery focused squarely on the highest levels of the Maduro government. To achieve roughly 30 minutes of intense activity over Caracas, the Trump administration is believed to have spent nearly a year in meticulous preparation, beginning shortly after Donald Trump started his second term in January 2025. Trump has made little effort to conceal his ambition to expand U.S. dominance across the Western Hemisphere. He has reframed domestic issues, illegal immigration and drug trafficking, as national security threats, using them to justify direct action against Venezuela.